HP 4th Champion Part 7. Harry woke early on Sunday morning and went straight to the Great Hall to wait for Dumbledore. He didn't have to wait for very long before the headmaster walked in, having a discussion with Professor Snape. The two men were muttering as Harry approached them. "Professor Dumbledore, sir," Harry said politely. Dumbledore and Snape looked at him, and Harry was struck by the fact that Snape did not sneer, or even look irritated at him. "Good morning, Mr. Potter." Dumbledore smiled. "How can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but I need a bit of help. You see, I was wondering if Hogwarts had a swimming pool, or something similar." "A pool?" Snape looked confused. Harry nodded, looking at the potions master, then back to Dumbledore. "I have this problem that I think a good long swim might help to clear up," Harry said. Trying to communicate with his eyes his meaning. Snape looked very puzzled until he saw Dumbledore's beard twitch. "While this school is not equipped with a swimming pool, I think that you might find the prefect's bathroom on the 5th floor suitable to your needs. It is inside the 4th door on the left side of the hall, past the statue of Boris the Bewildered. I do not think you will have any trouble identifying that particular statue, but if you do, you should find a nameplate at the bottom. I believe that the password for the door is Pine Fresh." "Thank you, sir." Harry smiled and turned to go when Snape called out to Harry. "Potter." Harry turned to see Snape take a few steps closer. "I wished to pass on my appreciation for your candor." Harry wasn't exactly sure what Snape was talking about, but thought it must have had something to do with the last time they spoke. Harry wondered how the potions master even remembered that conversation, given how drunk the man had appeared. "Not a problem, sir," Harry said, and began to turn away again. Snape looked as if he wanted to speak further, and he looked as if he was chewing on his tongue. Dumbledore had passed them and was now taking a seat at the head table. Harry gave the potions master a nod and left him, glancing over his shoulder when he was nearly out of the Great Hall to see Snape watching him go. "That was odd," Harry said to himself as he headed to his room. As it was so early, Harry was sure that the prefect's bathroom would be empty. Not that he was overly shy. He'd shared a dorm with 3 other boys for the past 3 years, and dignity had never been a problem. Harry just didn't want to bother anyone while he was trying to figure out the egg. Back in his room, Harry grabbed fresh clothes, ink, quill and parchment, as well as the golden egg, and stuffing it all into his backpack, and then headed off for the 5th floor. Dumbledore had been right. The statue depicted a very confused-looking cross-eyed wizard with his gloves on the wrong hands. Harry counted the doors and whispered the password at the 4th door. Harry gasped when he saw the room. It was done in all white marble with nearly 100 golden taps aimed into what could be a long rectangular pool set in the floor. On the furthest wall was a giant stained glass picture of a gorgeous mermaid sitting on a log. "Wow," Harry muttered as he took in the room. He went over to the taps and turned on the first one. Thick pearly white foam poured out, and Harry grinned widely. "Oh, the trouble Mark and I would get into with this stuff." Harry couldn't help but chuckle to himself. In no time at all, the pool, for lack of a better word, was filled with steaming, sweet-smelling water topped with a very thick, nearly solid blanket of foam. Harry took out his quill, ink, and parchment and placed them close to the pool and set the egg near the edge and undressed, sliding himself into the water. Unable to resist, Harry swam a few laps, smiling immensely with every stroke. "If there's a chance to become a prefect, I might think really hard about staying. It'd be worth it just to use this place whenever I wanted," Harry thought as he swam up to where he'd placed the egg. "What's interesting about our world is how one creature's language sounds very different outside of its normal environment." Harry lowered the egg under the water, cringing as he unlatched it. No sound came, though there was a steady stream of bubbles rising out of it. Taking a great gulp of air, Harry sank under the water completely. There were no shrieks, but a rather beautiful sounding voice singing out. Come seek us where our voices sound. We cannot sing above the ground, and while you're searching, ponder this. We've taken what you'll sorely miss, an hour long you'll have to look, and to recover what we took, but past an hour the prospect's black, too late, it's gone. It won't come back. Harry came up out of the water and brushed his hair out of his face. Quickly going over to the edge of the pool and drying his hands so he didn't get the parchment wet as he wrote the clue down. It took 5 more times under the water before he had it all written correctly. Once he was done, he pulled himself out of the pool. As he was dressing, 2 prefects from Ravenclaw entered and looked at him strangely. What are you doing here? The older of the 2 boys asked as Harry gathered his things up. Dumbledore let me in. Harry smiled at them. That seemed to satisfy the prefects and Harry headed back to his own room. He read the parchment as he walked, trying to decipher its meaning. Clearly it's going to be underwater. Harry said to himself. So, that's where the voices sound, and they're going to take something of mine which I have to get back within an hour. Harry. Harry looked up and saw Tracy Davis standing in front of his door. Hi. Tracy. Harry said cautiously. Tracy looked truly sad, her hands were fidgeting at her sides as she watched him approach his door. I tried your door, I wanted to talk to you before you went to breakfast or anything. But you weren't there. Obviously. She said, shrugging. Okay. Harry said, hefting his bag more securely on his shoulder. What did you want to talk about? Tracy sighed. I wanted to apologize for everything. She said, now looking into his eyes. I assumed when I shouldn't have, and I expected too much of you. I was being selfish, and I'm sorry. I should have expressed my feelings better and allowed you to make a decision instead of just letting myself believe we were together. Harry relaxed a bit and smiled, waving it off. It's fine. No, it's not. Tracy said quickly. I realized, partially thanks to Daphne, that you and I wouldn't be a good match, anyway. You're really sweet and good looking and all, but you're not what I really want in a boyfriend. You need a girl who's confident enough in herself to know that when you flirt with other girls, that it doesn't mean anything. I'm too possessive, and I'd end up hexing any girl who even looked at you. I think you and I would be better off just being friends, if you'll have me. Harry had to smile now. And he closed the space between himself and Tracy and hugged her tightly. Of course we can be friends. I'm sorry that I'm not a better fit for you, but I'm sure that you'll find exactly the right guy. Oh, no, I'm not worried about that. Tracy smirked as they pulled apart. I mean, look at how hot I am. Harry fell on the floor laughing now and Tracy laughed at her own joke. Monday morning, Harry, Neville, and Cedric were joined during their morning run by Victor Crumb. Cedric was very surprised when the Bulgarian showed up, but welcomed his fellow champion. But not nearly surprised as Harry was when Victor thanked him for introducing Victor to Hermione. She has accepted my invitation to the ball. Victor smiled. After you left to find your books, we spoke and then we went for a walk around the castle. She is much nicer than I hoped. Glad I could help out. Harry smiled, still shocked by how fast Victor had worked. Who are you taking? Harry. Cedric asked. I don't know yet. Harry answered honestly. There's a lot of really nice and good-looking girls. Still a bunch I haven't even met yet. What about you? Cho, of course. I asked her right after dinner when the ball was announced. Cedric smiled proudly. What about you, Neville? The round-faced Gryffindor looked up at the other 3 boys, blushing slightly. He's going to ask Hannah. Harry smiled. Neville's face looked as if it were close to bursting. I. Neville stuttered. Oh, come on, Nev. You couldn't have asked for a more perfect setup. Harry pointed out. The worst thing that can happen is she says no. She could laugh at me. Neville said dejectedly. They always laugh. Cedric smirked. It's what girls do, that's not necessarily a bad thing. How do you mean? Neville looked at Cedric, who was still smirking. It's kind of how they deal with nervousness. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't like you. And so what if she doesn't like you? Harry added. Like I told you before, I'm sure there are girls who think the world of you that you don't even know about yet. So, you've got nothing to lose. Ask her at breakfast. Cedric said. What? Neville looked terrified. Your friends are right. Victor nodded as they came to the end of their run. You will gain nothing by keeping silent. Do not bait, or you could miss your chance. Says the guy who had to get me to introduce him to the girl he wanted. Harry chuckled. Victor smiled and nodded. Yes, but once I was introduced, I did not bait. Okay, Neville nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it today. I'll see you guys later. Neville trotted up towards the castle while Cedric, Victor and Harry watched him go. Man, I hope she says yes to him. Harry said, and Cedric nodded. No kidding. I think I might feel bad if she turns him down. He will be fine. I think he is a good man. Victor said with confidence. Have either of you guys figured out the egg clue yet? Harry asked. Now looking at the Black Lake. The screams hurt my ears. Victor said with a disturbed tone in his voice. It sounds like someone being tortured. My roommates threatened to kill me if I open it in the dorm again. Cedric smiled. How are you getting on? I cracked it? Harry said, looking to the two others. You have to put it underwater. How did you figure that out? Cedric looked odd. And why are you telling us? Victor asked, very shocked. Because I don't care about winning. Harry said. You may recall that I wasn't even here to put in my name. My godfather and Remus helped me figure it out, and yesterday Dumbledore gave me access to the prefect's bathroom, and I got the full clue. I haven't figured out exactly what it means yet, but... Harry shrugged and the two older boys looked at one another with astonishment. You are a very unique individual. Harry Potter. Victor said at last. Thank you. Krum offered his hand and they shook. He then waved to Cedric, and turned to head towards the Durmstrang ship. I think you might have broken him. Cedric grinned as he and Harry headed back towards the castle. Here we are all trying to win the glory for our schools and ourselves, and you're just along for the ride. You know what would be kind of weird would be if you ended up winning the whole thing. Honestly, I think it would be cooler if the four of us tied for it. As far as I can tell, it's never been done before. We'd all go down in the history books for it if the four of us lifted the cup in victory together. Somehow, I don't see it happening. First off, that girl Fleur won't even look at us, much less want to work together for a four-way tie. Secondly, I get the feeling that the Durmstrang and Beauxbatons headmasters are likely pushing their champions to work hard to win. They want to beat Dumbledore. You just gave Krum a leg up. So, maybe I should let Fleur know then, too. Then we're all on a level playing field again. Harry grinned and Cedric chuckled. So, we're going to start training for the next task, I take it? Let's talk after you've heard the clue. Then we can decide what we should do next. Harry smiled as they split up in the entrance hall. Harry had a brainstorm late Monday evening in regards to the Yule Ball. Stacy. He shouted in his room as he was getting ready for bed. He felt so stupid now. Why not extend an invitation to the girl he'd been crushing over for a year and a half? How impressive would it be that they finally got to have a date, and it was in Scotland for a really posh ball? Of course, there was more than a few hurdles to go through. The hardest would be getting Tracy here. But Harry was confident that Dumbledore would be able to help him out. Which was why Harry went to see the headmaster right before he went to classes on Tuesday morning. "I do not see a problem with getting your friend here for the ball. Though I will have to ask permission from her parents, as I believe she will likely be home for holiday. I should be able to get an answer for you by tomorrow afternoon," Dumbledore promised. And Harry felt very happy for the next 2 days while he waited for a response. He could feel the predatory stares from girls as he walked the halls and sat in classes. But he wasn't worried about them now. He was sure he had a date for the Yule Ball now. And he could now focus on the second task now. But everything came crashing down when Dumbledore caught him in the hall after his last class of the day Wednesday afternoon. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Potter, but Miss Harris's parents wished for their daughter to spend Christmas at home with them. As it was, I had a very difficult time in initially asking for permission as I'd forgotten that you had been under the name of James Black at your old school. Miss Harris herself kept insisting that she didn't know anyone named Harry Potter." "Oh," was all Harry could say when he'd been given the bad news. "Cheer up, Harry. I am more than confident that you will find a suitable escort for the ball." Dumbledore smiled softly and patted Harry on the shoulder. Before heading off again to wherever he'd been heading for in the first place. "Harry, are you okay?" Hermione asked, coming to Harry's side. "Yeah, I guess. I don't know what I'm going to do." "About what?" Hermione had been uncharacteristically cheerful ever since Krum had asked her out. Harry had also noticed the two spending a bit more time together, though if Victor had his way, they'd likely spend a lot more time together. Harry couldn't help but wonder if Luna was right about Hermione needing a good snog. "I wanted Tracy to come over for the Yule Ball, but her parents said she couldn't. But I feel bad because I've had to lie to my friends because I've had to protect my identity. Why don't you write them and explain? I'm sure they'll understand." Hermione smiled, linking her arm through Harry's and began dragging him towards the Great Hall. "Oh, I'm sure they will. Especially Mark. He's always said that there was something more to me. But, he's also crazy." Harry chuckled. "But it doesn't solve my date problem. I thought you and Tracy were getting along again," Hermione pointed out. "And that's exactly why I'm not going to ask her. It's better that we just be friends, and going to the ball would change that again, and we'd end up hating each other, and this time we can't fix things. No, I need to go with someone else. I don't think you're going to have any difficulty finding someone, Harry." Hermione smiled wryly. "I guess I just need to ask someone." "Shouldn't I?" Harry rolled his eyes as Hermione playfully nudged him with her shoulder. "The sooner you do it, the sooner you can focus on more important things. Like the next task." "Exactly." Hermione grinned. Hermione's optimism did not rub off on Harry. Especially whenever he spoke to any of the other girls he was friendly with. Most all of them dropped subtle hints about not having dates for the ball yet. Sully kept talking about her dress during runes, while Megan Jones bragged about how great a dancer she felt she was. Parvati Patil, whom Harry had never really talked to, sighed dramatically when expressing her disappointment that she'd not been asked yet. Ginny Weasley complained that she desperately wanted to go and hoped a fourth year would ask her. Nearly every girl seemed to trying to be dropping subtle hints that they wanted to go to the ball with Harry, or at least that's how it seemed. By Friday, Harry was really starting to feel the pressure to ask someone. He was even starting to get a few rather disgusted looks from boys. Harry guessed they were waiting on answers from girls who were waiting to see who he asked. After dinner on Friday evening, Harry sought refuge in the library once again. Every night that week, he'd gone to do his homework and research for the second task. "Hi, Harry," Mandy Brocklehurst said softly as she came up next to him. "Did you take promising potion making?" "No, sorry." Harry smiled. Mandy just nodded, her faint smile falling away. "Oh," she said simply. "Are you okay? I've noticed that you've pretty distracted lately. Usually, you're one of the first to finish our assignments in runes, and this week you've been one of the last. Is it the second task?" It was then that Harry realized that not once had Mandy brought up the ball when he was around her in class. In fact, the only time he and Mandy ever actually spoke was when they ran into each other in the library, and then it was pretty much about homework, or about their lives outside of school. And Mandy was pretty. She had a very sweet smile, and shoulder-length slightly curly brown hair and soft brown eyes. She was very slender, from what Harry could tell. Again, the Hogwarts robes did a great job of hiding a girl's shape. "Mandy, do you have a date for the ball?" Harry asked suddenly. "What?" Mandy's eyes widened in shock. She looked around to see if someone else was around them, ready to spring out and start laughing. "I was thinking that we could go together." "I mean, if someone hasn't already asked you yet." "Why you want to go to the ball with me?" Mandy gasped, she was still having trouble believing what was happening. Harry Potter, the Harry Potter was asking her out. "No, he's just a boy. Just a normal, everyday, average boy." Mandy started thinking to herself. "Okay, a boy is asking you out. A very cute boy. A boy that every girl in this school would cut their right arm off to be with. Yeah. You've always been nice to me, and I think we might have fun." Harry shrugged. "But if you don't want to go with me, that's okay." "No, I do," Mandy said quickly. "I do, it's just that, well, I figured you'd want to go with someone more fun, like Sue or Morag, or someone else. I'm not what you'd call the life of the party. So," Harry said, making a face. "It's just a dance. We'll go, we'll dance and hopefully have a decent time." "All right," Mandy said, nodding. "I think that would be really nice." "Thank you, Harry." "No, thank you." Harry smiled, pleased he'd solved the dilemma. Now he could move forward, and he had a pretty good-looking girl as his date. Harry invited her to come study with him, and they worked together on their runes work and talked a little about the ball itself. When Harry went back to his room that night, he was confident that his problems were now over. "I asked her, Harry." Neville cried out as he met Harry in front of the entrance hall Saturday morning. "I did it and she said yes. Can you believe it?" "Great, Neville. Why'd it take you so long?" "I wanted to do it Monday after you and Victor and Cedric gave me all that advice, but, well, I could never catch her alone, and you guys kept ribbing me about it all week. Well, I finally got her by herself last night." "Well, not totally alone. Susan Bones was with her, but I figured it was the best I was going to get. So, I asked her if we could talk, and then I told her I thought she was really nice and I asked her. She didn't even laugh." "That's great, Nev. I told you she'd say yes. So, have you asked anyone yet?" Neville asked as he and Harry took seats along the Hufflepuff table. Zachariah Smith and Justin Finch Fletchley looked up as they heard Neville's question. "I asked Mandy last night in the library." "Mandy? Mandy who?" Zacharias asked, puzzled. "Mandy Brocklehurst." Sally Ann said, not looking up from her newspaper. How do you know who she is? Zacharias asked. Because I'm not a self-centered prat. Sally said, looking annoyed. She's been in our potions and transfiguration classes since first year. Could you be more unobservant? Zacharias started to retort when Justin held up his hand. Drop it, before she embarrasses you again. Anyway. Harry said, turning back to Neville. I asked her, she said yes, so now I have a date. You got a date? Susan asked as she, Hannah and Megan Jones sat down. Hannah smiled at Neville, who blushed slightly but smiled back. Mandy Brocklehurst. Zacharias said, still seething from Sally Ann's remarks. Oh, she's sweet. Megan said. Intensely shy, though. And pretty, too. Good on you, Harry. Thank you. Harry smiled, taking some toast from a plate. Will you save me a dance? Megan asked with a smile and a wink. I don't see why not. Harry shrugged. And me? Too. Hannah said. But just one. You see, I intend to spend a lot of time with my date. Neville coughed into his goblet and Harry had to thump him on the back. Hannah giggled and Susan smirked at her friend's antics and Neville's anxiety. I will save you all a dance. Harry smiled. Harry. Ernie Macmillan smiled as he. Wayne Hopkins and Stephen Cornfoot took seats at the table. You've been so busy we haven't seen you lately. We talked to McGonagall and Flitwick about setting up a race. McGonagall said she would talk to Dumbledore. Great. Harry smiled. In the meantime, we thought we could put together a pickup game of Quidditch. You know, today. Sure. Harry smiled. Who are you getting to play? We just thought of it on the way here. Stephen shrugged. But, I'm sure we can get enough players in no time. Cedric already said he was in, and went to talk to Madame Hooch about supervising. And she said yes. Cedric grinned as he came over. So let's eat and get teams together. Oh, yeah. Susan grinned. I can't wait to see you fly, Harry. The entire school seemed to agree. Word spread like wildfire that there was to be a pickup game of Quidditch that morning, and every single house team, and many others, turned up to play. Madame Hooch suggested that 4 teams be put together, and an elimination sort of competition be instituted with each game lasting 1 hour unless the snitch was caught. 4 Hogwarts students were selected to be captains, and the rest of those who'd come to play lined up according to the position they wished to play. Before teams could be picked, however, there was a flurry of excitement as Victor Crumb walked onto the pitch, broom in hand and slight smile on his face. He stood next to Harry, Cho Chang, Draco Malfoy, and Zacharias Smith. Zacharias took one look at the 4 others and with a deep sigh headed to where chasers were being selected. Cedric had been made a captain, and as he was a seeker already, had no need for one on his team. Harry remembered Cedric's dream team, and wondered if he were going to get it today. Harry wound up on Angelina Johnson's team along with Katie Bell, Roger Davies, who along with Angelina would make up the chasers. The keeper was a big sandy-haired boy named Cormac, who started talking to Harry about his ideas about how to run a team. And Rupert Summers and Alexander Summerby as beaters. Harry's team would be facing Cedric's team first, and Harry couldn't wait to get in the air. Harry noticed that the stands had filled and was suddenly back at Salem for one of the year's matches. He felt his muscles tense with excitement and on Madame Hooch's whistle, launched himself into the air. Harry did a quick lap around the pitch, keeping his eyes open for the snitch. Cedric pulled up alongside him with a roguish smile. I gotta tell you that I'm not going to go easy on you. He smirked, and Harry returned it. Good. I don't want you to have any excuses to why you lost. Cedric laughed and pulled away, attempting to spot the flying golden snitch before Harry. Harry didn't even pay any attention to how his team was doing. None of it mattered to him. As far as he was concerned, it was just he and Cedric up there. Harry kept one eye out for the little golden ball and one eye on Cedric, in case he spotted to ball first. He need not have worried, as he soon spotted the barest glint of gold zipping near one of the goal posts. Leaning forward, Harry shot off like a rocket. Cedric saw him shoot off, and gave pursuit. Cedric was almost flat on his broom and he quickly caught up with Harry, who glanced back and smiled. They were nearly caught up with the snitch when it shot straight up. Harry pulled back on his broom and shot up after the ball, Cedric close on his tail, and pulling even in a moment. Harry narrowed his eyes, never taking them off of the little golden ball. He could hear Cedric next to him, but Harry pushed it out of his mind. The snitch angled off to Harry's left, towards Cedric. Harry started to reach out, but put his hand back when he saw the snitch whiz past Cedric's outstretched hand. Harry flipped himself over, aiming his broom at the ground. He'd lost sight of his goal for a moment, but found it almost at once. The little golden ball was zigzagging towards the ground. Harry sped on his broom straight down at such a speed, Harry wondered if the skin of his face might be ripped right off his skull. He could not stop himself from smiling at the thought of Cedric getting hit in the face with Harry's own face. Harry could hear Cedric catching him up once again. And it was now a race for the tiny speeding gold ball. Closer and closer, they approached the hard frozen ground, and Harry was not relenting. He felt, rather than saw, Cedric cast a glance in his direction, but Harry didn't flinch. Urging his broom faster, Harry flattened himself along his broom. The ground was now roaring up at him, but the snitch kept up its descent, and Harry kept up his pursuit. At the last minute, the snitch pulled up and took a quick course along the ground. Only inches above the snow. Harry pulled up hard at the last possible second and launched himself in the air off his broom, his fingers clasping around the tiny fluttering ball. Tucking and rolling as he hit the ground with a heavy thud. There was a roar of excited shouts from the stands as Harry got to his feet and held up the snitch. Cedric landed next to him first, and offered his hand. "I'm now convinced you're out of your mind." He grinned. "I thought for sure you were going to crash," and pulled up a good 10 feet above the ground. "That's nothing. Wait until you see me race." Harry grinned. Cedric threw his head back in laughter as the others began to land nearby, shaking hands and congratulating each other for playing so well. Harry's team had won their match at 210-60. They'd also won the match in 20 minutes. Harry and his team went to the sidelines to watch the next match. He was very excited to actually get to watch Crumb fly. He was not disappointed. Harry learned a lot by watching the famous Seeker. The first thing he learned was that Victor liked to play with his food. He would hover above the pitch, and then shoot off as if he'd seen the snitch. Cho would follow Victor, and 3 times nearly ended up a crumpled pile of broken bones on the ground. After the 3rd time, however, Cho seemed to have learned her lesson. However, it cost her the match. The 5th time Victor shot off, he had actually seen the snitch, and Cho, being much more cautious now, remained up in the air, until she saw for certain that Crumb had actually seen the snitch. By then, it was too late. Harry felt a bit bad for Cho, who looked very disappointed as she landed and was greeted by Cedric. Whatever Cedric said to her cheered her up immensely, and they went to congratulate Crumb, who bowed and shook hands with Cho. Crumb's team had won the match at 250-20. Harry felt excitement course through him as he realized that his team would be facing Victor's. Harry saw that Victor's team's chasers weren't quite as good as his own, but the beaters, Fred and George Weasley, were intensely vicious. He'd have to be careful of them. Harry took to the air once again, and noticed that more than a handful of teachers had now come to watch the game. Once again, Harry shut out everything else except finding the snitch. Krum tried to trick him into crashing to the ground just as he'd done with Cho, and while Harry usually did shoot off after Krum, he kept his eyes focused in front of Krum to see if he had indeed found the tiny golden ball. And pulling away once he saw that Krum was playing with him. Krum quickly figured out that Harry was not falling for his charades, and decided to actually find the snitch. But it was Harry who spotted it first. Victor tore after Harry and caught up to him in no time. The two combatants wove, dodged, and thread their way through the other players in desperate chase of their common goal, which led them on a very intense pursuit. The snitch shot into the air, and then dove back to the ground. It looped, zipped, and spun with both Harry and Victor hot on its tail. In moments, Harry found himself shooting towards the ground, just as he had been with Cedric. This time, however, he knew that Krum would not yield as Cedric had done. However, there was no need for that worry, as the snitch pulled up and shot off to Harry's immediate left. Rolling his broom and turning, Harry found himself suddenly behind Krum, who'd pulled up and over Harry. Harry grimaced and was able to gun his broom to pull even with his opponent. Harry tried to cut under Krum to gain ground on the snitch, but Krum anticipated this move, and dropped suddenly, knocking into Harry's shoulder. No wonder he's considered the best. Harry smirked to himself. The snitch shot up again and headed towards the seats where the teachers were enjoying the match. Harry and Krum both pulled up and rolled themselves to give chase. Harry had managed to pull ahead, but Krum was only a breath behind him, and Harry pushed his own broom past its limits. Harry was getting ever closer to the tiny golden ball, and knew that in just a few seconds it would be his. He just needed to reach out. Taking a hand of his broomstick, Harry lay flat on his broom, squeezing every last ounce of speed from his beloved firebolt. Harry could not believe it. His fingers were just a breath away. He was going to beat Victor Krum. He was going to beat a world champion Quidditch star. And in those moments, as he let his focus wander, Victor Krum came up from underneath him and snatched the tiny golden ball right out of Harry's imminent grasp. Harry moaned in agony as he pulled up to avoid crashing right into the stands. Victor was already heading for the ground, as the crowds cheered. And that's why he's a world-famous Quidditch star. Harry bemoaned. It had been one of the best matches of Harry's short life, and he would always look back on it with deep fondness. He had gone toe-to-toe with the best in the world and very nearly scraped a victory. There weren't a lot of people who could say they got that close. Harry'd learned so much from watching and flying against the best, that he knew he would be unstoppable next year. Harry touched down, and immediately turned to Victor and congratulated him. "You fly incredibly well, Harry." Victor smiled, patting Harry on the shoulder. "For a moment, I thought you had me beat, but in that last second, you lost your focus." "How could you tell? You started to slow down." Victor grinned and Harry couldn't help but laugh. The Great Hall was abuzz of conversation at dinner that night, with everyone still talking about the matches. Harry arrived to dinner and took a seat with the Hufflepuffs as he usually did. He was greeted with congratulations, condolences, and exclamations of amazement. "I thought you were suicidal," Megan Jones said as Harry sat down next to Cedric and Cho. "Diving straight for the ground like that against Cedric. None of us could even see the snitch." Zacharias pointed his fork at Harry. "Justin and I thought you were trying to trick Ced, but Wayne said he saw the snitch just in front of you. It was really great." Susan smiled from Harry's other side. "Thanks." "Where's Hannah?" Harry asked, noticing that Susan's blonde best friend wasn't present. Susan got this devilish smile and nodded towards the Gryffindor table. Harry cast his gaze over the Great Hall and spotted the missing Hufflepuff sitting with Neville, talking and enjoying dinner. She's become very curious about him since he asked her to the ball. Susan commented. Says she got a rather interesting recommendation from someone a while ago. Susan gave Harry a pointed look, but he simply smiled. I may have mentioned that Neville thought she was cute or something. I'm happy for them. Neville's a really good guy. He just needs some confidence. Maybe hanging out with Hannah will help him. Seems like you enjoy helping people, Harry. Cedric remarked. You've helped me with the tournament. We've been helping each other. Harry quickly countered. You helped Victor with the clue and introduced him to Hermione Granger. Cedric nodded towards the Gryffindor table where Krum was sitting next to Hermione and getting hounded by Ron Weasley and a few others. From where Harry was sitting, it looked as if Victor was struggling to remain polite. And you've been trying to show us all how stupid it is to just associate with people in our own houses. Justin pointed out. I don't think I would have ever made friends with Anthony, and he's been great. Which reminds me. I owe him a galleon. Why do you owe him a galleon? Sally Ann looked up curiously. I bet him that Harry would beat Krum to the snitch. Justin shrugged. That was stupid. Wayne laughed and Justin glared at him. I almost won, didn't I? Justin said defensively. You're a good man, Harry, and I'm honored to call you a friend. Cedric smiled. Ignoring the now heated discussion going on with the fourth-year boys. I am too, Harry. Cho said from across Cedric. By the way, I'm supposed to ask you to save Marietta a dance at the Yule Ball. She was a little disappointed that you didn't ask her, but she ended up making a date with this really cute boy from Bose Baton. So I think she's pleased. Glad I could help. Harry said looking confused. Cho and Cedric laughed and Harry joined them in their mirth. I'm a little sad I didn't get to fly against you. Cho said when she finally stopped laughing. I think it would have been good fun. You really put Ced and Krum through their paces. And, you didn't fall for Krum's tricks. Well, I got to watch him before I flew against him. I saw his tactics work on you, so whenever he made a dash, I simply looked to see if he had really seen the snitch. I think most people just go after him because they want to beat him and they forget to look first. That's what I did. Cho admitted. Still, how many school-age seekers can say they flew with Victor Krum? We're an elite group, that's for sure. Harry nodded. When dinner vanished, and desserts appeared. Dumbledore rose from his seat and went to the podium to address the students. I wish to inform you all about a special event that will be taking place on the day before Christmas. Due to a growing interest, we will be having a series of broom races on Christmas Eve. Anyone who is interested in participating should sign up with their head of house, where they will receive a copy of the rules to study in preparation. Those of you from our guest schools should speak with Professor McGonagall. McGonagall stood so that the students could see who Dumbledore was referring to. The races will commence at 10 o'clock on December the 24th. After today's exciting Quidditch matches, I hardly need tell you what a sheer treat I believe we are in for. Thank you. Applause broke out and excited conversations broke out. I assume all of you are going to enter. Susan smirked as she looked at the boys in her year. I can't. Justin shrugged. I don't have a broom, and there's no way I'm going to try and fly on one of the school brooms. Of course I'm in. Zacharias grinned. Harry made it sound so fun, I can't wait. Me, too. Ernie smiled. Good luck to you, Harry. Susan smirked. With all these dolts on brooms, I don't fancy your chances. You don't think I'm fast enough? Harry looked offended. No. I'm sure none of these idiots know which end of the broom is which. Susan smirked and Harry laughed while Ernie, Zach, Wayne, and Stephen all glared. Harry ended up shielding the redhead from a volley of chocolate pudding, which was seen by Professor Sprout, who happened to be walking by. "Smith!" she shouted, causing Zacharias's face to go scarlet. Detention. Susan helped clean Harry up, and offered to help him with his charms work in the library. "With Hannah occupied, I don't have anything else to do," Susan said by way of an explanation. They walked to the library, and set to work, though by the time Harry returned to his room for bed that night, he'd hardly done any work at all. He'd spent nearly 3 hours alone with Susan, just talking. She was funny and smart and just easy to open up to. Harry felt that he could trust her with his deepest secrets, and wondered if she felt the same about him. He was also taken with the way she would brush her deep red hair behind her right ear. Or the way she would suddenly look away from him when she would say something uncomfortable. A secret or an embarrassing anecdote. She was really very sweet, and as Harry closed his eyes, he imagined holding Susan's hand and looking into her sweet brown eyes as he leaned into. "Oh, no," Harry said, sitting bolt upright. "No, I can't be falling for her. I made a date with Mandy, and she deserves to be treated right." "But, you're not Mandy's boyfriend," a voice said in his head. "True. But it's not fair to any of us if I make a date with Mandy and then try and get Susan as my girlfriend. Besides, I'm only here for a few more months. But Remus said you shouldn't deny yourself if you find someone special, and let's not forget, you do have the option of staying at Hogwarts. Remember?" the voice said. "I forgot about that," Harry said aloud. "And apparently, I'm going crazy, because I'm talking to myself." Sirius said, "You're only crazy if you answer yourself," the voice in his head reminded him. "Ah." Harry managed to get through the next few weeks after having convinced himself that his interest in Susan that night had been nothing more than a passing infatuation. She had been the first girl outside of Hermione and Luna whom he'd had a good long conversation with that didn't consist of winks, sly glances, or giggling. Harry had also noticed that she didn't look at him like most of the other girls in the school. Like some sort of conquest. She simply seemed to like him as just another boy. Susan was becoming a real friend, and over the last few weeks, she'd proven how much she cared. She'd studied with him and listened to his stories, and never once alluded to wanting anything more from him. Like Hermione, Susan was happy just being Harry's friend. Harry also knew that they would likely not be spending so much time together if Hannah and Neville weren't studying together and taking long walks alone. Harry had tried to spend time with Mandy, but her friends had become constant companions, and tended to overrun their attempted conversations. Mandy couldn't even go to the library alone anymore. Harry thought Mandy was starting to look a little surly over this. Harry hoped that he wouldn't be the cause of her friendships falling apart. On top of this, Harry's thoughts had become centered on the beautiful French champion, Fleur Delacour. Ever since he'd told both Cedric and Victor about the egg, he'd felt a growing urge to try and speak to Fleur about it as well. Harry didn't like the thought of the three boys having any sort of advantage over Fleur. He felt they should all be on equal footing. The problem was, Fleur was still turning her nose up at him at every turn. He even thought he heard her mutter in French whenever she passed him. Thankfully, Fleur's younger sister Gabrielle was not so snobbish. In fact, the little French girl took every opportunity to talk to Harry, usually batting her eyes, and tossing her sleek silvery blonde hair. Harry knew she was being extra flirtatious whenever they spoke, and took every opportunity to touch him in some way, whether it was a playful pat on his arm, or an extra long hug and kiss on his cheek. Gabrielle was very obvious with her intentions, and Harry sometimes felt as if there was some sort of spell or bewitchment struggling to take hold of him whenever they spoke. Still, Gabrielle was always sweet, and promised she would tell Fleur about the egg in a way that would make it seem like an innocent suggestion. Gabrielle was confident that Fleur would dismiss the idea if she knew it had come from Harry. Then, she had asked him to please save a dance for her at the ball, mentioning that she was to be escorted by a seventh-year boy from her school. Harry wondered how Fleur was feeling about this. Harry got a desperately needed reprieve from thinking about girls as he and Cedric, now joined by Victor, had begun training for the next task. Once again, the agreement was made that they would not share their individual plans, but would work together in training. The three boys were using the prefect's bathroom to improve their swimming, as well as braving the frigid waters of the Black Lake on the weekends. The build-up to the Yule Ball was reaching a fevered pitch as Christmas grew closer. Actually, the female populace focused on the Yule Ball, while most of the male populace was anticipating the broom races. Harry was actually surprised that barely anyone mentioned Christmas itself, not even on the last Hogsmeade weekend before the coming holiday. Harry had to get his dress robes, as he'd been unprepared for the ball to begin with, and felt truly frightened when he saw so many girls picking out dresses, shoes, and jewelry. Thankfully, he wasn't the only boy who needed proper robes for the event. "Thanks for letting me come with you, Harry." Neville smiled as they made their way to the selection of men's robes. "I feel better not being here by myself." "Save it, Nevada." Harry shook his head. "As far as I'm concerned, you're doing me a favor. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be getting." "Well," Neville said as he shrugged and pulled a rather nice set of robes from the rack and held it up to himself. "I don't think it matters all that much, so long as they're nice looking. I think I'll just go with basic black." Neville shrugged. "A classic never goes out of style, I suppose." Harry sighed, looking through the robes. "No, they don't." A sweet flirtatious voice came from behind the two boys. Harry and Neville turned to see Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil standing behind them. "But, there's a lot to be said for living on the wild side. For instance, Harry, you might think about these." The stunning blonde smiled as she pointed out a set of bottle green robes. "I think they'd bring out your eyes, and that seems to be one of your most talked about features, right below you incredible butt." Harry snorted and Neville snickered at Harry's discomfort. But Neville nearly fell over when Harry turned to present his posterior and tried to get a look at it. "Is it really incredible?" he asked, loving how Parvati had to turn away to keep from howling with laughter. "I guess it's all right, but I think yours needs to be immortalized in stone or a painting, or maybe a poem." Lavender rolled her eyes. "I don't think a poem is really the way to immortalize someone's rear, Harry, sweetie." "I don't know," Harry said, pretending to look thoughtful. "Your sweet elegant cheeks are like the shape of—" "Okay, enough," Lavender said, placing both her hands over Harry's mouth. He'd been talking very loudly and more than a few people had turned to listen in on Harry's lamentations on Lavender's hind end. Lavender was quickly looking around to make sure people went on about their shopping. "So, is there any chance you have room on your dance card for me, then?" Lavender asked. "I'd like it to be something slow so I can get real close to you. Close enough so I know just exactly how hard you work out, if you catch my meaning." Harry fought the blush that he could feel creeping up on him. "I don't see why not," Harry said, determined to embarrass Lavender. "I think a slow song would be good. Then I can see if the rumors are true or not." "What rumors?" Lavender cocked her head. "Just something some rather envious Slytherin girls were saying about you. Harry nodded towards her ample chest, which Lavender puffed out to accentuate a bit more. "You mean whether or not my boobs are real or if I use some sort of engorgement charm on them?" "That'd be the one." Harry smiled. "Well, after our dance, I think you'll have no doubt in your mind. Might even let you give them a very thorough examination. Lavender grinned, as Harry's face burned a brilliant shade of cherry red. She blew a soft kiss and, with Parvati in tow, left Harry there with his mouth hanging open. I think she won this round, Harry. Neville said, gasping. But not the war. Harry said determinedly. Harry took Lavender's advice and purchased the bottle green robes, while Neville selected a set in charcoal grey. They were fitted, and once the alterations were made, headed over to the Three Broomsticks to meet with some friends for lunch. Having finished his Christmas shopping, Harry was thankful not to be one of the scrambling, last-minute shoppers. The stores were so crowded that Harry didn't think he'd be able to get into any of them. The tavern turned out to be quite packed, as well. Thankfully, Harry and Neville weren't the first ones there, and Justin waved them over to their table. Neville took the seat that Hannah had saved for him, and Harry had to hide his smile when Hannah gave Neville a peck on his cheek, making the round-faced boy go pink. "How'd you boys do?" Susan asked as Harry took a seat. "Good. Got our robes just fine. We are quite capable of getting clothes," Harry said, giving Susan a look that made her chuckle. "Did you try them on, or did you just hold them up to yourself and call it good?" Susan looked pointedly at Harry. Meghan and Sally Ann burst into giggles as Zacharias looked at Susan. "Try them on?" he asked, his face paling. "Of course we tried them on. We even got them altered to make sure they fit right." Harry rolled his eyes. "Excuse me," Zacharias said, standing up from the table and grabbing a shopping bag at his side. "I'll see you lot later," he called over his shoulder as he made his way through the crowded pub. "Guess we know how he bought his robes now, don't we?" Hannah laughed as Zacharias bumped a third year on his way out. "How did she do it?" Meghan asked, looking at someone over Harry's shoulder. He turned to see Hermione walk into the pub with Victor, their arms linked together, Hermione smiling brightly as Victor was talking to her. "How did she land one of the most eligible bachelors in the world?" Meghan asked. "Partly because of me," Harry said, turning back to the table. "She's my friend, and he wanted to meet her, so I made the introductions." "Wait, he wanted to meet her?" Meghan asked, pointing at Hermione. "Come on, now," Susan said quickly. "Granger's all right." "Yeah, but look at her." "What's wrong with her?" Harry asked, his tone becoming a tad angry. "Well, for one thing," Meghan started, but was cut off by Hannah, who recognized Harry's irritation. "Nothing is wrong with her. Megan's just jealous." The blonde smiled, trying to diffuse the situation. "Maybe Victor likes her because she's one of the few girls around here who doesn't fall all over themselves to get close to him because he's famous," Harry said irritably. Meghan had the good sense to look shamed, and the topic was dropped. "Oh, my gods, I totally forgot to tell you all yesterday." Hannah sat up suddenly. "I was coming out of the bathroom on the second floor right before lunch yesterday, and I saw the whole thing happen." "Well, don't leave us hanging in suspense," Susan said, urging her friend to share whatever story had her so excited. "Well, you know that Ron Weasley's been striking out with every girl he's asked to the ball, right?" Hannah said, sitting forward so much that she was practically on top of the table. "He asked me like I should be honored that he was even talking to me or something," Sally Ann said with a shiver. "He asked me a couple of weeks ago, right after herbology. I just looked at him like he was out of his mind. How does a boy like that come from such a nice family? Ginny's sweet, and the twins are loads of laughs. Even Percy wasn't that bad," Meghan exclaimed. "He's been telling everyone that he was going to have the best-looking witch on his arm for the ball. Neville sighed. He even said he might just ask Fleur Delacour, you know, the French champion? Like it was going to be some big thrill for her or something. Well, he's clearly been striking out everywhere, Susan said flatly. And we're not the only ones to have noticed, Hannah said conspiratorially. Eloise Midgen shoved him against the wall yesterday and told him that he was taking her. She actually threatened him. She said that if he refused, she knew a spell that would turn his manhood putrid green and make it smell like really old cheese, and that the only way he'd ever get a girl to be with him is if she had no sense of smell. She was so scary that I think Weasley might have wet himself. Hannah laughed and the others had no choice but to join in. Well, at least he's got a date. Harry smirked. Tracy Davis told me that Malfoy's two trolls, Crabbe and Goyle, might have to go to the ball with each other. I just wonder which one will be the girl. Oh gods, Harry, my brain didn't need that mental picture, Susan nearly shrieked and swatted Harry's arm playfully. After lunch, Harry headed to his godfather's house. He had promised to join Sirius and Remus for dinner, and was looking forward to seeing them, as always. His work towards the next task had hit a dead end, and he desperately needed their advice now. When he arrived, he was greeted as always with a warm hug from his godfather, but he was surprised to see they had company. Harry, this is my cousin Andromeda and her husband Ted. And the lovely young lady there is Nymphatora, but if you value life at all, you will simply address her as Tonks. Andromeda was a slender woman with shiny black hair, heavy-lidded eyes and a friendly smile. Ted was a rather burly man. Not fat, but stocky, with a shock of sandy blonde hair and an easy-going aura. The young lady, as Sirius had introduced her, was very interesting looking. She was dressed in high work boots and fishnet stockings over ripped red leggings over black leggings and torn black denim shorts. She had a black hooded sweatshirt over a t-shirt with a picture of the Weird Sisters. Her hair was the brightest shade of bubblegum pink Harry had ever seen. Watch her, Harry. Tonks grinned as she waved to Harry, who smiled and waved back. It's nice to meet you all. We invited them to dinner tonight because they're the only family I get along with. Yeah, you told me. Any family members who were even remotely interesting? And Harry and Sirius mimed blasting something with imaginary wands at the same time, and then laughed. We read about your participation in the first task, and Sirius was filling us in on the details. Ted smiled as Harry took a seat in the sitting room. I must say I'm impressed. I don't think I could take on a dragon the way you did, even now, much less at 14. I should have come up with a backup plan. I had no idea I would exhaust myself, Harry said ruefully. How are you coming on preparing for the next task? Andromeda asked sweetly. Funny you should bring it up. Harry smiled. I'm kind of stuck. What do you mean? Remus asked from the kitchen, where he and Tonks were working on dinner. I need a way to breathe underwater for an hour, at least. I thought of and have been practicing with a bubblehead charm, but I can't see clearly. I thought of transfiguring myself, but I think it would be best if I keep my arms and hands, so I can use my wand. Are there any potions or something I could take? Everyone fell into silent contemplation for a moment. It was Ted that spoke up first. I don't know about potions, but there are a number of plants that might give you the desired effect. I was just thinking that, sweetheart. Andromeda said, patting her husband on the leg. Something like gillyweed. Sirius clapped his hand to his forehead. We should have thought of that, Moony. Right? That time in 6th year. Remus roared with laughter. I'd forgotten that. I smell a story. Harry grinned, leaning forward in his seat. Andromeda and Ted also leaned forward, and Sirius began laughing, which left Remus to tell the tale. Peter was very gullible. And he was very much in love with Catherine Thompson. Remus began the tale. When Sirius could breath, he added his comments to help the story along about how James convinced Peter that he could capture Catherine's heart by diving to the bottom of the lake and finding a true pearl. The story went on that Sirius managed to convince Peter that in order to get a pure pearl, one had to enter the lake without the taint of clothing. Since the pearls, Sirius said, making air quotes when he said pearls, were supposed to be in the deepest part of the lake, we had to figure a way for him to breathe. And we were studying water plants at the time. So, we pooled some money and got a bit of gillyweed. We then marched him down to the lake, watched him disrobe and dive into the lake. Once he was under the water, James ran into the castle and gathered as many girls as he could to greet Peter when he emerged. Peter comes spluttering out of the lake, confident he's found a true pearl, which of course he hadn't, as what James and I told him was a true pearl was just a pebble. But there he was, holding it in the air like a champion. When he got his hair out of his face and saw all the girls staring and pointing and laughing, he dove right back in the water. Sirius howled, and everyone joined in. "You two were awful, awful people," Andromeda said when she was finally able to breathe again. "That, we were," Sirius confirmed with a smile, though Harry noticed a glint of shame in his eye. "I think gillyweed would be a good idea for you here, Harry, though I'd like it if you kept working on the bubblehead charm as a backup," Sirius said, and Harry nodded. "We'll place an order for you on Monday. I think we should get a few samples, so you can experiment, and know what to expect during the task," Remus remarked. "We've been trying to get familiar with the lake, but it's just so dark and cold," Harry said as he and the others went to the table to eat at Remus' invitation. "Well, when Peter started talking to us again, he told us how useful the gillyweed was." "You should have no problems," Sirius said as he took a roll and passed the plate along. "Did you manage to get your dress robes for the ball?" "Yes." Harry smiled. "Finished my Christmas shopping, as well. Sent Duncan's, Mark's and Stacy's presents this afternoon." "Good on you." Sirius nodded proudly. "Dumbledore told us that he was unable to convince Stacy's parents to let her come to the ball," Remus said. "Who did you end up asking?" "Mandy Brocklehurst. But since then, I barely had a chance to talk with her. Her friends are constantly popping up and interrupting us. I think she's starting to get really upset," Harry replied, dishing up roast potatoes. "Well, you'll get plenty of time at the ball, I'm sure." Ted smiled. "To be honest, I really wish Dumbledore could have gotten Stacy over here. It would make things a lot easier." "Well, Harry, you can't really blame her parents for wanting her at home on Christmas." Sirius looked at his godson. "It might not have helped that Dumbledore kept calling him Harry," Remus commented. "Isn't that his name?" Tonks asked, looking to Harry and Sirius, who was shaking his head now. "We had to keep Harry's identity secret, so he was James Black while he was at Salem," Sirius explained. "I always felt bad that I lied to my friends," Harry said. "I mean, just about my name. I was always honest with everything else, though. I was finally able to explain things to them in my last letter. It was nice to come clean, and they both said in their responses that they understood." The Tonks family all agreed on Harry's belief in honesty, and the dinner topics changed as Sirius' cousins got to know Harry better. Harry was fascinated by them, especially Nymphadora, who Harry discovered was in her first year as an Auror. He knew that Sirius and his father had graduated the Auror program, but due to circumstances, they had been unable to begin active duty. Thought for sure I was going to fail because I'm so clumsy. I can barely walk on my own without tripping over my own feet, but there's no one better in concealment." "You're that good?" Harry asked interestedly. "Dora's a metamorphagus," Ted said proudly, smiling at his daughter. "A what?" Harry looked confused. By way of explanation, Tonks changed her spiky pink hair to a deep shade of violet and grew it down to her shoulders before making her chest much larger. This last stunt gave both Remus and Sirius fuel for ridicule, as Harry had been unable to look away. When dinner was over, Harry said goodbye to the Tonks family and Remus as Sirius wished to escort Harry back up to the castle. They spoke about nothing of great importance, and Harry wondered if Sirius was just missing his godson. Since they'd come back to England, they hadn't seen each other quite as often as they were used to. Sirius insisted that Harry spend as much time as he could preparing for the tournament, which meant Harry often stayed at the castle on the weekends. If things hadn't happened the way they had, Harry was sure he'd be packing for their annual trip to Florida, and the oceans of bikinis. With that thought, Harry succumbed to a wave of depression. There was a palpable feeling of excitement as the last week of classes went by. When the last class bell rang on Friday, Harry thought for sure that the castle would shake with all the cries of joy. Instead, it felt as if the level of intense anticipation rose. Harry realized the day before Christmas Eve what had the school so wound up. As he, Cedric, Neville and Victor met for their morning run, they saw McGonagall, Flitwick, Sinistra and Hagrid working to finalize the rings for the broom races the next day. Harry felt rather idiotic, as the topics of conversation were limited to that and the Yule Ball. "Are you guys ready for that?" Neville asked as he nodded towards where the professors were working in their thick winter cloaks. "It's just another race." Harry shrugged. "Though I am excited to get up there." "Does anyone know how many people signed up?" "Only 3 people from Durmstrang, besides myself," Victor said. "I think they're all intimidated by the idea, though they are anxious to witness it, I am sure." "Loads of people in Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw signed up," Cedric said as he watched the professors. "Cho told me she was going to, until she saw how many people were already signed up. She decided it might be more fun to watch this time, but she's hoping it catches on and maybe she can participate next year or something." "Everyone who has a broom in Gryffindor signed up," Neville sighed. "Did you?" Harry asked turning to Neville. "No." The boy shook his head. "I don't own a broom. Besides, Hannah's happy I'm not competing. She said I could keep her warm." Neville blushed as the other 3 boys wolf whistled. "You guys have been spending a lot of time together," Harry observed. "Yeah. She's so much nicer than I imagined, and she's been really patient with me and all. She helps me with my homework, and I've been able to help her with herbology. By the way, you remember the advice you gave me when we first met, Harry? About focusing on the incantation and your intent? Well, I told that to Hannah and she said it's helped her loads in charms. Glad I could help you help your girlfriend." Harry smirked. "We're not together," Neville quickly said. "But, if I don't make a complete ass of myself, I think I might ask her at the ball." "Smart move," Victor said. "What about you and Hermione?" Neville asked. "Yeah. I've hardly gotten to spend any time with her since you 2 met," Harry said. "I didn't mean to steal your friend." Victor blushed, but Harry waved it off. "I'm happy for her. I think she needed someone like you in her life, but I do miss talking to her outside of class." "I will try to remedy that." Victor grinned. "It's not a super huge deal. Susan's been cool to hang out with, and Tracy and I have finally managed to fix our friendship. She's much cooler as a friend than she would have been as a girlfriend." Harry shrugged. "She seemed a little possessive," Cedric pointed out. "A little." Harry's eyes were wide and all four boys laughed, remembering Harry's stories of Tracy's bizarre behavior. The rest of the day, Harry spent in his room preparing his broom for the race the next day. He'd been rather flippant about his excitement, but now that it was only hours away, Harry could feel the oh-so-familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through him as he clipped the twigs and polished the handle of his firebolt. So far as he knew, no one else owned a broom like his, but he also knew it wasn't the broom that won the race, but the person riding it. If he'd learned anything from all his year in the racing game, it was don't get overconfident. The next morning, Harry and the others decided to take a break from their routine. Harry woke up an hour later than he usually did, showered, dressed in his racing uniform from Salem, and went out to check the weather conditions. There was a fresh blanket of snow on the ground, and the air was bitterly cold. But it was a bright, overcast day. Harry knew this would be good, as there would likely be no glare so he could see each ring clearly. On top of that, there was only the barest hint of wind. Smiling, he went into the great hall for a light breakfast. He was unsurprised to see it so full this early in the morning. As he entered the hall, he noticed a large group of people surrounding two redheads he'd finally learned were the infamous Weasley twins. He remembered what great beaters they were, but other than Quidditch, he'd not really spoken with them. He drew closer to find out what was going on when he heard his name. 5 galleons on Malfoy to win it all, someone said. Pretty long odds on that, one of the twins said. You've got nearly 100 people out there today. 5 galleons. The unseen voice said, and the redhead shrugged, took the boy's money and gave him a slip of parchment. The boy, who Harry saw was wearing Slytherin colors, dashed past him and took a seat at the Slytherin table, showing the parchment to Draco Malfoy, who smiled smugly. You guys are making bets? Harry asked. Both twins looked up with identical grins. Indeed, we are, the first twin said. We made a killing on you after the first task. You're the long shot, again, the second said. Victor Crumb is the shoe-in, especially after what he did a few weeks ago. But he's never raced before, Harry pointed out. In fact, I'm the only one out there today who has any experience. But, you are competing against the very best that our fair Hogwarts has to offer, the first said. And the worst, the second added. Good point. Harry smiled and waved as he headed up towards the Hufflepuff table, where Susan and Meghan were talking over their toast. Good morning, Harry. Susan smiled as he took his seat. Big day, huh? Yeah. Did you make your bet? Harry asked, nodding towards the twins. No, I don't like to gamble. Especially when I already know who's going to win it all. Susan smiled brightly. Yeah, who's that? Harry asked, noticing the bright sparkle in Susan's brown eyes. Cedric, of course. She laughed, making Harry drop his head to the table with a heavy thud. Don't worry, Harry, I'll be cheering for you. Meghan laughed. So will I. There was no mistaking the almost ethereal voice of Luna Lovegood, and Harry spun in his seat and gave the short blonde a friendly hug. When he pulled back, she handed him a thin chain with a single butterbeer cork on it. It'll bring you luck, she smiled. Harry immediately threw it over his head and around his neck, and tucked it in his jersey. Thank you, Luna. You're very welcome, Harry. Luna smiled brightly. As she turned to go, Susan stopped her. Luna, would you like to sit with us in the stands? The redhead asked. Harry saw Meghan give a puzzled look but chose to ignore it for now. Oh yes, I would. Thank you, Susan. Luna said, a little of the dreamlike expression on her face dissolving as she smiled. Then, we'll save you a spot. Susan smiled and Luna wandered off to get her breakfast. That was really sweet of you, Harry said, and Susan shrugged. I just thought it might be nice to get to know more of the people you seem to be friendly with. Susan shrugged, picking up a muffin. Harry felt a surge of the infatuation he'd buried a few weeks ago when he'd convinced himself that Susan was nothing more than a friend. Yeah, but she's so weird, Meghan pointed out. It's part of her charm, Harry argued. Trust me, you hang around her for just a little while, and you will want to spend a lot more time with her. She's blunt, but in a very charming way. At 9 o'clock, Dumbledore rose from the head table and asked that anyone who was competing in the day's races bring themselves down to the Quidditch pitch. Harry, along with around 100 others, rose and made their way out of the Great Hall. Harry went to his room to collect his broom, gloves, goggles, and a cloak to keep himself warm when he wasn't racing. When he arrived at the pitch, he found Cedric and a few of the older Hufflepuff's friends. They're lining us up by year, Cedric said, pointing out the long lines that were forming. Harry thanked Cedric and headed over to the fourth-year line. Harry saw that the shortest line was made up of second years. He also saw that there wasn't a single first year. Harry wondered if the youngest students were too frightened to compete, or if there was another reason. He was pulled from his musings by two voices. My gods, Weasley! What did you do? Go into the forest and collect twigs to attach to that branch. We all know you can't afford a real broom. Stuff it, Malfoy. I'll be surprised if you actually finish the first heat. Everyone who's seen you play Quidditch knows you can barely stay on your broom. Harry turned to see his least favorite people nearly nose to nose, which was saying something as Ron Weasley was so tall. Other fourth years were gathering around to watch, and Harry actually felt a bit of concern for Ron, as Malfoy's two hulking goons were standing on either side of him, as usual. At least I'm on the team, Malfoy sneered. The best you could do is to daydream about licking my boots when I finish a game. But, I thought that was your father's job, Weasley countered. Malfoy's pale face blanched and he shoved Ron, who went to throw a punch. Luckily, Dean Thomas caught the hot-headed Gryffindor and pulled him away. If you get in trouble for hitting him, you won't get to race. Save it, Dean said wisely, as Seamus stepped between Malfoy and Weasley, glaring at the Slytherin. Harry shook his head. There's at least one in every race, he thought, as he looked over all the other competitors. It was then that Madame Hooch stepped up, whistling to get their attentions. You should have all read the rules, so I won't waste time going through them all again, she said loudly. Harry then noticed the stands were filling up and the noise from the crowd was getting louder and louder. He also noticed a few seventh-year volunteers standing behind Madame Hooch, all clutching very old and tired-looking brooms that Harry guessed belonged to the school. Good, they've got monitors. Harry smiled. Monitors hovered near rings to make sure no one tried to cheat and say they'd made it through. Even though the rings were charms to glow as people passed through, some racers were known to try and cheat, saying they'd passed with someone else. As there are only 10 second years, they will participate in the first heat. The winner of that heat will wait until the semi-final eliminations. As for the rest of you, we will be running heats of no more than 20 racers at a time. When you hear your name called, you will proceed to the starting line. When the cannon sounds, you will then be allowed to mount your broom and take off. You must complete 5 full laps, passing through each hoop. If you miss a hoop, you will be disqualified. The top 3 racers in each lap will move into the semi-final eliminations. Second years, you may now take the field. Harry and all the other participants went to the sidelines and sat down to watch the first heat. Harry grimaced when he saw not a single one of the competitors take off their cloaks. He suddenly realized that it was likely that no one would remove their cloaks, and that he would have a strong advantage when he took to the air. Any racer worth his salt knew the less drag you had, the better. Still, they all had to learn on their own. It was just common sense, really. The second years proved to be quite entertaining. It was clear to Harry that none of them had really spent a lot of time on a broom. They were slow and unsure, focusing more on getting through each hoop than getting ahead of the pack. In the end, 2 girls and a boy were advanced. None of the second years seemed upset about failing, though. In fact, they were all laughing and patting each other on the backs as they headed off the field. "Listen for your name to be called, and take the field," Madam Hooch called out. The next heat were made up of third years, and again, none of them removed their cloaks. Though all of them were much better than the second years, with a few notable exceptions. Harry was unsurprised to see Ginny Weasley place first in her heat. She was an exceptional flyer in Harry's opinion. And from the moment she kicked off the ground, she outstripped everyone she'd gone against, and looked fully exhilarated when she touched down. When the third years were done, Madam Hooch once again began calling names, this time from the fourth years. Finnegan, Thomas, Weasley, Entwistle, Boot, McDougal, Midgen, Turpin, Cornfoot, Hopkins, Macmillan, Smith, Crabbe, Goyle, Malfoy, Potter, Romanovsk, Petronov, take the field. Harry rose and stripped off his cloak, adjusted his gloves and with his broom in his hand, took to the field. He saw all the others looking at him strangely as he stood there looking up at the first ring. He knew they were all wondering why he'd taken off his cloak as it was so cold. They weren't allowed to wonder for very long. The thunderous sound of the starting cannon sounded, and Harry threw his leg over his broom and kicked off. He was almost flat on his broom, elbows tucked in, head as low as he could keep it without losing precious field of vision. Harry didn't spare a glance behind him, but he knew that, thanks to his years of experience, he'd left his fellows far behind. As such, he had no difficulty slipping through each and every ring with ease. He even began passing stragglers on his second lap. With each lap, it became harder to slip through the hoops, as the stragglers bunched up. Still, Harry touched down well ahead of his competition. He turned to see who else made it onto the next bracket. Lisa Turpin landed next to him, her face bright red from the cold. Harry smiled when he saw that she had lost her own cloak, and guessed she must had shrugged it off right before taking to the air. Harry had to give her a high five as she bent to retrieve her cloak. She had been the only one to follow Harry's example, and it had paid off. Draco Malfoy landed next, looking very smug. He gave Harry a superior nod and began heading for the sidelines again. "He tried knocking me off my broom," Lisa said contemptuously. "I hope someone runs him into a tree or something." "Don't worry." Harry smiled. "He'll get his." The rest of the participants landed nearby, and Harry noticed that Ron Weasley was just ahead of Crabbe and Goyle. Harry thought the redhead was going to cry with as pitiful as he looked. Harry wondered if Malfoy would rub it in his face that he'd done so poorly, and then realized that he most likely would. Malfoy was a bully after all. "Ron," Harry said, sidling up to the redhead. "Don't worry about it. To be honest, I'm surprised most of you are doing as well as you are. My first race, I ran right into the post holding the first hoop." "S all right. Ron said sulkily and wandered off. Harry wondered if Luna might take advantage of his sour mood and show him what a great girl she was by finding a nice empty broom closet. Why do I think of these things? He asked himself after feeling the bile rise in his throat. Harry watched the next 3 heats with interest. Apparently, everyone learned from Harry's run and all the competitors removed their cloaks before taking to the field. One 7th-year boy even removed his shirt to much laughter and catcalls. Harry was unsurprised to see Cedric and Victor place in their runs. Victor, of course, placed first in his heat, while Cedric led the 6th years. Harry congratulated each of his friends as they finished and returned to the sidelines. With the 7th years finished, Dumbledore called from the stands that the final race would be run immediately after lunch. Harry was met by Susan, Hannah, Neville, Luna, and Hermione. "That was amazing flying, Harry." Hermione smiled as she hugged her friend. "Thanks, Hermione." Harry smiled. "I told you that charm would bring you luck." Luna smiled as she hugged Harry as well. "I never doubted you, Luna." Harry smiled. "Speaking of which, I think someone else could use a bit of Luna magic." Harry pointed to Ron, who was following Seamus and Dean up to the castle. "While nothing would please me more than to take his mind off of his horrible defeat, I'm afraid that he would be most unwelcoming of my company at the moment. His head is so full of rackspurts right now, I don't even think he'd noticed if I were to remove all of my clothing in front of him." Harry gave her a squeeze and told her he thought that was unlikely. Luna shrugged and simply stated that it just wasn't the right time for them yet. Susan and Hannah hugged Harry as well and Neville clapped him on the back. "We were all wondering why you took off your cloak," Hannah was saying. "Then when you took off, Neville spotted it right away. He said by the way you positioned yourself, you were obviously eliminating as much drag as you could. He's a smart one, that Neville." Harry smiled. "Hands off, Potter." Hannah grinned, linking her arm through Neville's possessively. "Get your own boy." "Thankfully, I'm not interested in dudes." Harry grinned. Hermione and Susan both whispered thank gods. "Why didn't you tell us about taking our cloaks off?" Ernie Macmillan shouted as Harry and the others sat down. Cedric, Cho and Victor had met up with them on the way in and they all sat together at the Hufflepuff table. "Oh, come on, it's just basic common sense." Harry looked appalled. "Besides, would you have told me if the situation were reversed?" Ernie looked as if he were going to say yes, but realized immediately that everyone would see through that lie. "I didn't even know Lisa Turpin could fly, much less beat out all those others," Justin remarked. "She was stunning." "Should I be jealous?" Sally Ann asked, looking a bit perturbed. "No, sweetie. She's much too tall for me." Justin grinned, kissing Sally Ann on her cheek. "Besides, I like my girls feisty." "There's some really good flyers left now," Cedric said before taking a long drink from his goblet. "That 3rd-year girl who placed first," Victor said. "Your friend, right?" Hermione nodded. "She was flying one of her brother's brooms, but she's still really good. She wants to play chaser on the house team next year, and she's been flying since she was 6. She will be one to watch out for out there," Victor said determinedly. "What's this last heat going to be like, Harry?" Cho asked. "Traditionally, the number laps are doubled and the rings are made a bit smaller. So it's not as easy for say 3 or 4 people to fly through at once. It's more competitive for placement. If you're running neck and neck with someone's going to have to give up and allow the other person through the hoop first, or risk missing it. And just so you guys know, I'm not letting you go before me." Harry grinned wickedly. If you can even keep up with me, that is. Laughter broke out at the table, and they enjoyed their lunch, listening to Harry, Cedric and to a lesser extent, Victor trash talk each other. When lunch was finished, Dumbledore announced that the last race would take place in a half an hour. Harry was heading out of the Great Hall along with the rest of the school when he felt someone tug on his arm and drag him out of the throng of student. "Hey, Mandy." Harry smiled when he finally saw who'd taken him out of the herd. "I didn't get a chance this morning to tell you good luck, but after that race, it was clear that you didn't need it." "I still appreciate the sentiment." Harry smiled, and Mandy couldn't stop her own smile. "With Krum and Cedric out there, I think you're going to have a much tougher time," she said. Harry shrugged, and reached up to brush a lock of hair out of her face, making her shiver slightly. "So, I was thinking I could wish you luck now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Harry could say anything, she stood on tiptoe, holding his biceps for support, and softly placed her lips on his in a very sweet, lingering kiss. Harry had been stunned by her boldness, but could not say that it was unwelcome. He smiled and thanked her. Mandy simply blushed and started for the door. Harry caught up with her and they walked down to the pitch in comfortable silence, each stealing glances at the other. Mandy went up to the stands, while Harry headed to the starting line where the others were all lined up, each and every one of them having discarded their cloaks. Harry smirked as he saw Draco Malfoy hugging himself, his teeth chattering, while just behind him, Ginny Weasley was doing stretches to loosen herself up. "All right," Madame Hooch said as she stepped in front of the competitors again. "This is the final race of the day. There will be 12 laps altogether. So you are aware, as per the rules, the hoops have been made smaller. You may find that you won't be able to go through a hoop if you are right next to someone. As before, you must pass through each hoop or risk disqualification. At the sound of the cannon, you may mount your broom and kick off." Harry wished luck to Cedric and Krum, who had taken spots next to Harry. Once again, Harry made sure his goggles were secure and his gloves were on tight. He dug his right foot in the ground and bent at the knees, holding his broom to his left so he could mount and kick off at once. Most everyone would wait until both feet were on the ground before kicking off, but Harry knew you lost precious seconds in that. The cannon thundered, and Harry threw up his left leg while kicking up hard with his right. Harry was the first in the air, followed closely by Lisa and Ginny, with Krum, Cedric, and Malfoy right behind. Tucking his elbows in and flattening himself as much as he could afford, Harry made it through the first ring with Cedric behind him. Harry heard a loud moan from the crowd and wondered what had happened, but didn't dare look around. After he passed the third ring, Harry saw Krum in the corner of his eye. Harry had never had any illusions about the threat that Krum posed, but Krum was inexperienced at racing. On the Quidditch field, Krum was king, but this was Harry's yard, and here, he was the big dog. Harry barrel rolled through the fifth hoop, angling himself to the left for a straight shot through the sixth hoop, Krum having to give ground and then pulling even with Harry after every hoop. After passing the 10th hoop, Harry was shocked to see that he and Krum now had Cedric keeping pace with them. Harry grinned widely as he was now neck and neck with his friends. But it was still his sport, and they needed to be schooled. Harry dropped his head a bit and slipped through the 11th, 12th, and 13th rings easily, trying hard not to laugh at the thrill of racing with such good competitors. Krum managed to slip past him on the 14th ring, but Harry quickly resolved that slipping under Krum and popping up right in front of the Bulgarian. Cedric had fallen prey to Ginny Weasley, however, and was having to really fight for each ring with the talented redhead. "You are making this very difficult," Victor shouted at Harry as he once again managed to pull even with the fourth champion. Harry simply laughed and shot through the 20th hoop, starting his second lap. He was followed by Crumb, Ginny Weasley, Cedric, Lisa Turpin, Katie Bell, Angelina Johnson, Marcus Belby, Michael Corner, Marcus Flint, Matthew Farnswood, Romilda Vane, William Roberts, Draco Malfoy, Benjamin Dickinson, and finally little Daniel Watson. The standings stayed like that for the next 6 laps, with Harry and Crumb seeming to fight for first place. Anyone with a set of omnioculars would be able to see the wide grins each boy had as they passed through each hoop. The crowds were on their feet now as the racers shot through for their 8th lap. It was in this lap they had their first disqualification, and to no one's surprise it was Draco Malfoy. Draco had slammed into the side of one of the hoops early on in the race, and had been fighting to gain ground ever since. At the start of the 8th lap, he had finally managed to crawl out of the last 5 flyers, but had the choice of allowing second-year Matthew Farnswood through the hoop first or go around. He chose unwisely, and Madame Hooch, with her incredibly keen eyesight, had seen him try to cheat. The next 3 laps were nail-bitingly intense, as Cedric and Ginny fought for position right behind Crumb, who was battling Harry for domination. Crumb was beginning to realize that Harry was far too well practiced at this game. He now understood how Harry must have felt when they flew against each other during the Quidditch match. He was flying against one of the best, and it was a privilege to be doing so well. That didn't mean he was going to make it easy on the younger boy. He was going to make Harry earn each and every hoop. The Flyers tore through the 20th hoop, starting the final lap now, with Harry still leading the pack and Crumb tearing at his heels. Ginny was very close behind the Bulgarian and Cedric nearly on top of her. Katie Bell came next with Angelina Johnson, Michael Corner, Lisa Turpin, Marcus Flint, Michael Corner, Romilda Vane, Marcus Belby, Matthew Farnswood, William Roberts, Benjamin Dickinson, and Daniel Watson bringing up the rear still. Victor tore after Harry, hating that he had to give up each hoop, but Harry had them dialed in, and was already angling his broom for the next ring before he'd even passed through the current hoop. What was worse was that he'd been unable to get any sort of retort to his jibes and trash talk. It was like Harry was nothing more than a grinning guided rocket. Cedric was having his own issues with the tenacious redhead girl, who was making this race one of the hardest things he'd ever done. When he'd chanced a glance at the girl, all he saw was the most intense look of focus he'd ever seen on someone's face in his life. Ginny was not going to give up. Harry led Victor through the 7th, 8th and 9th hoops, with the Bulgarian trying to pull ahead after each ring. Harry knew that in the open air, Crumb was king. His was so agile on his broom, and incredibly fast. But in a race it wasn't about how well you could maneuver. It was about how in sync with your broom you could be. The slightest misjudgment could force you to the back of the pack with little to no chance of gaining it back. While during a Quidditch match you could fly by the seat of your pants, during a race you had to be thinking 3 turns ahead. As he passed through the 12th hoop, Harry glances at Victor and gave a predatory smile. Victor could only smile in return as Harry suddenly put on a burst of speed, dropping his head a bit and shooting forward through the last few hoops. Harry touched down and turned to greet Victor as he landed just a few seconds later, and the 2 boys shook hands, both smiling like 5-year-olds. "That was impressive," Victor said. "Now, we can both say that we went against the very best." "As much as it would please me to say I'm the best," Harry began, but Victor shook his head. "Today, my friend, you are the best," Victor said with authority, and Harry thanked his Bulgarian friend. Ginny sat down next, screaming in delight that she had placed behind Victor Crumb. She was followed by Lisa Turpin and then Cedric. "I was gaining on Ginny there, and had to pull back to avoid hitting a ring. I had no idea Lisa was right behind me. She just ripped through the hoop right behind Ginny, and I knew I was never going to get my spot back. Cedric grinned as he greeted Harry and Victor. One by one the other racers came in, some looking grumpy while others, especially the younger kids, looked absolutely thrilled, especially Daniel Watson who been dead last the entire race. Harry shook hands with each racer. That was so fun. Daniel Watson grinned as Harry greeted him. Can we go again? Now why is it you never fly like that in the races at home? Sirius shouted as he and Remus came over to congratulate Harry. Oh, please, like you could do better. Harry laughed as he was hugged by his godfather. Damn proud of you, kid. Damn proud. Sirius laughed holding his godson tightly. Harry was no stranger to winning, but this race had been different. He was sharing a passion with his new friends and an entire country. Even if he'd lost, he would have felt as good. Well, maybe a little less so, but still today had been one of the very best days of his life. At dinner that night, Harry, Cedric, and Crumb were hounded by people wishing to hear their thoughts on the final race. Harry was just happy to be among so many friends, as Victor went on about how much like a grinning statue Harry had been. With Mandy joining them for dinner and sitting close to him, Harry felt like things just couldn't get better. Please like and subscribe.